I'm actually going to talk about all four of the constitutional amendments that are on the ballot. They're all put forth by the General Assembly. They pass legislation and then they put a resolution out and it appears on your ballot. And there are four of them this year. The first one is Amendment 1, which is the Opportunity School Districts, which is probably the one most people have heard the most about. It came from the office of Governor Deal and was put forth to the legislature because he's trying to reform education. In doing so, this would allow the state to come into any local school board where there's a chronically failing school, and the governor would appoint a superintendent to take over that school. They could remove staff, remove the local school board, change the curriculum. They could change the school to an independent charter school, or they could shut the school down altogether. And what it does is basically, it says that the governor can take over no more than 100 schools at a time, and he keeps them in these opportunity school districts that are overseen by a board, which is also appointed by him. And these people are accountable to the governor. So, the way that they determine whether or not the school is chronically failing is they take a look at your standardized testing scores, and if the scores are below a certain percentage for 3 years or more, then you would qualify for to be failing. It doesn't apply to the whole school districts. You could have one school in a county that would be failing and the rest would be unaffected by this district. But it's an extremely partisan issue in the legislature. It almost is completely supported by Republicans and not at all by Democrats, which seems to be changing as more information is coming out about it. Some numbers about it that you'll hear from the supporters. I'm kind of going to, instead of telling you how to vote, I'm going to tell you what the supporters and what the opponents are saying about it. There are currently 6% of Georgia schools are failing. Most of them are in metro Atlanta or areas with high populations. There's a few in Columbus, there's a few in Savannah, and the majority of them are in and around Atlanta. We have 2,200 schools in Georgia, so when you think about 6%, that's a lot of schools that would be affected by the possibility of the governor coming in and taking over when so few are currently facing that type of thing. The other, something that someone who's not supporting it might tell you is that if the legislature, if this passes, it's part of the Constitution, all the legislature has to do is increase the number of schools that can be opportunity school districts. So it's 100 now, but in 2 years it could be 500 or all of them. There's nothing that would stop them from changing that at a later time, which is why so many people are against it, because the governor's office is a political position, and a lot of people feel that the superintendent at the state level might be more qualified and less political for a position like this. 50 school boards around the state have already come out against it. The Georgia PTA Association is against it. The NAACP, the Georgia Association of School Boards, and the Association of Educators in Georgia. They're all against it. Tappan County, locally Tappan, Vidalia, and Candler have come out against the amendment. I think their biggest fear is that when the state comes in, they can change how the school district uses their money. So you're paying your property taxes and your money's going towards your local school board, but then someone from the state comes in and tells you how it's spent. On the pro side, there aren't a whole lot of options for students that are stuck in failing schools, but right now the governor already has the authority to remove school board members who are, they have problems with misconduct or conflict or anything like that. So if there are questions about these as I go along, I'm happy to take them or take them afterwards, but I'm just trying to give you a general overview. Amendment 2 hasn't gotten much publicity, but it's equally contentious. It's called the Safe Harbor Act, and it came from a piece of legislation in 2015 called Rachel's Law. Rachel was a young girl in Atlanta who was trafficked and put into basically a sex slave community. And she was a young girl when it happened, and so the legislature wants to change the Constitution to make it so that adult entertainment industries like strip clubs and things like that are taxed $5,000 a year or 1% of their gross revenue. And that money will go to a fund to help victims of human trafficking and sex trafficking. It also increases penalties for people who traffic victims or are involved in it in some way. And it allows for civil forfeiture practices, which is when they seize your cars or homes or money if you're participating in these activities. It also increases the fines for, like, if in terms of restitution. Some of it would go to the victim, and then additional money would be added on to go to this fund. Supporters of the bill obviously want to help victims and help people who have suffered, but the opponents of the bill argue that, or the resolution argue that there is no correlation between the adult entertainment industry and human trafficking and sex trafficking. Most of those things come from run-down motels and the internet and even street corners. It's certainly not focused on one industry. And I think that that brings a lot of fear to a lot of people because they are worried that if it's this industry this time, later on it might be a different type of industry that just because legislators have an issue with, I mean, no one's going to admit they like a strip club. So it's a good political piece to be against something like this, and it's a great opportunity to do that. So the biggest criticism of it is that the language is misleading. The language on the ballot will suggest that it reduces the likelihood of human trafficking, but obviously when you're just helping rehabilitate victims, that isn't exactly cutting down on it. The laws have to change and police have to be present and know where these types of things are happening before the victims become victims. So that is the Safe Harbor Act, which is Amendment 2. Amendment 3 is the Judicial Qualifying Commission Amendment. Currently, we have an independent commission in our state called the Judicial Qualifying Commission. So the members are appointed by the state bar, and they include lawyers, judges, and citizens. And these people are the watchdog agency for our judges. So if a judge is dealing with a conflict of interest, misconduct, anything like that, these people, if you wanted to file a complaint, you could. If I wanted to, a lawyer could. You would file a complaint with this commission. They would investigate it, and they would either reprimand the judge. Sometimes they even remove them from the bench if it's a very egregious charge. So they are an effective tool for the people and the lawyers. Unfortunately, the commission has become extremely political. The state bar is political in itself, and there are some state legislators who were removed as judges by the commission, and now they would like to see the commission be removed because they can no longer serve as a judge. So that's how this came about. And what they want to do is dissolve the commission completely and create a new one. And instead of having the state bar and attorneys and citizens work to appoint these types of people, they want to have the legislature do it. So the Speaker of the House will be responsible for nominating some people, the governor, and the president of the Senate. They would nominate people. They initially wanted to make it so that no citizens could serve on the Judicial Qualifying Commission, but that ultimately didn't pass. But you can see how it's a complete shift in power if it does pass. This one probably has the most opposition statewide just because it deals with ethics, and I think people are tired of their government being out of control and not having any recourse, and I don't think they want to give more power to someone who's not accountable to them. So if you are in favor of dissolving the commission and appointing a new one, you would vote yes. The language is very confusing. If you don't want to see it dissolved, you would vote no. The one thing about our commission is it is actually one of the ones that has the fewest number of citizens involved in the process in the entire country. I think we only have 2 or 3 members that are citizens. Everywhere else has 6 or 7 or 8 people that, like you and me, who know nothing about a judge and could just independently weigh how they're behaving. So I think that you don't think it will affect you, but at some point or another, you would want to consider that you might be in front of a judge at some point in your life and this could affect you. Number 4 is the fireworks amendment. It is the easiest one to understand, It is the most cut and dry amendment out there. In 2015, we made commercial fireworks legal for consumer purchase in Georgia, and we added an excise tax on purchase and the licensing and any types of sales of the fireworks. This amendment would allow 55% of the tax to go towards a trauma care commission every year. 40% of it would go towards implementing a grant program for ISO ratings, and 5% of it would go towards 911 centers around the state. The biggest opposition is coming from rural areas because, much like a lot of other things in Georgia politics, the rural areas get the short end of the stick and the least amount of funding. And if there's $100,000 to spend, it's not going to be evenly divided among counties. It's by population and things like that. So there are people who are hesitant to just change the Constitution to allow this tax for more money for other areas when most people in Metro Atlanta have an ISO rating that is just fine. So if you want to, all of these are if you want to amend the Constitution, you would vote yes. If you don't want to amend the Constitution, you would vote no. So afterwards, I'm happy to answer any questions or explain why I might be voting a certain way, but I'm not going to do that up here. So.
Okay, thank you. Let's give her a hand. And we appreciate